Happy Sabbath, and it is so nice to worship the Lord together. And I hope that our moments together in the Lord will be a blessed moment. This Sabbath, for the next few minutes, I want to share with you an experience of the children of Israel, because the experiences of the children of Israel are so relevant to us. Their unfaithfulness to God and the suffering, their faithfulness to God and the blessings is what we got to draw lessons from. And one of the experience of all the thousands of experiences they had in their history is the experience of the children of Israel complaining to God and the consequences that they suffer for the complaint. This experience we find in the book of Numbers chapter 21. I'm sure you have heard of it, but let's go through that again. In the experience of the children of Israel in Numbers 21, we find that the children of Israel have come to the Mount of Hor, and they had camped there. But as usual, children of Israel, instead of being thankful to God, instead of being grateful to God, instead of counting their blessings and naming them one by one and looking up to God and being thankful, they began to complain. They began to question the leadership of Moses. They began to complain to God. Why are we brought here? Why couldn't we stay back in Egypt and enjoy the life in Egypt? And my Bible tells me in Numbers 21 that God was very angry with the children of Israel. And the Bible tells us that God had provided them food, heavenly food, food of the angels. Yet they complained, and God sent fiery serpents, poisonous serpents. And the children of Israel were dying because of the snake bites. Lesson number one from this experience, and that is, was it not the serpent that brought sin into this world by tempting Eve and Adam? And when they fell into his temptation, sin infected them and they began to die. And fortunately or unfortunately, we are all infected and beaten by the serpent and poisoned with sin, that all of us are dying. God said in Romans chapter 6 verse 23, the wages of sin is death. We are sinners and we are dying, like the children of Israel who were beaten by the poisonous snake and they were dying. There was no hope. There was no hope. And they were just dying. Thousands were dying. They could not escape from the snakes. Snakes were everywhere. We cannot escape from sin. Sin is everywhere. Sin is in us. Sin is all around. We cannot escape. No hope. We are in this hopeless state. Sinners and dying in sin. And so Moses prayed to God on their behalf. Moses pleaded with God on their behalf and said, God, you got to be merciful. And so God told Moses, you see, that's the kind of God that we serve. So merciful. In spite of their sinful nature, in spite of their complaints, God was merciful. And he told Moses, okay, fine. You make a serpent of brass. Put it on a cross. Put it on a pole and lifted it up. And when that is lifted up, and a person beaten by snake, when he looks at the lifted serpent, he will be saved and he will heal. Numbers 21 verse 8-9 says, then the Lord said to Moses, make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole, and it shall be to everyone who is beaten by the serpent, when he looks at it, all shall live. So Moses made a bronze serpent and put it on a pole, and it was so. If a serpent If a serpent had beaten anyone, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he lived. Now the question is, did the bronze serpent on the pole heal the man beaten by the serpent? Did the bronze serpent brought life? Did the bronze serpent brought death? I want to make it clear here. The importance of this bronze serpent put on the pole and lifted up is symbolic. There are two things. It was lifted up, it brought life. Now turn with me to John chapter 3 verse 14 and you will find Jesus' word. Jesus' word. John chapter 3 verse 14 and it reads, read with me John chapter 3 verse 14. And it says, and as Moses, this is what Jesus said, and as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. That 15, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. Two things, brothers and sisters. Jesus said, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness. Where was the serpent lifted up? In the wilderness. Where are we? In the wilderness of sin. Dying in sin. Where was the serpent lifted up? In the wilderness. And Jesus said, just as the serpent was lifted up, the Son of Man, Jesus Christ, must be lifted up. It was not the bronze serpent. It was the act of lifting up that is important, brothers and sisters. Jesus was lifted up on the cross. Now, the next part is, when the bronze serpent was lifted up, whoever looked at the bronze serpent that was lifted up on the pole, even if he was bitten by the snake, he would live. That is what Numbers 21 verse 9 says. What did Jesus say? The Son of Man shall be lifted up, verse 15, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. Are you getting the connection here? The serpent was lifted up. It was not the serpent. It was the lifting up. Jesus was lifted up. And whoever believes and looked at that serpent that was lifted up. Now you see this. When a man or a woman in the Israelite camp was beaten by the snake, he looks up, not at the serpent, but he looks up and connects to God. It was the act of faith that it would heal. The serpent was not the bronze serpent did not bring the healing. It was God who brought the healing, because the man or the woman or the child who was beaten by the serpent looked up in faith that God would heal him, and he lived. Now the lesson here is this. Jesus himself said, just like Moses lifting up the serpent on the pole, the Son of Man shall be lifted up. I told you in the beginning, we are all sinners and have come short of the glory of God. Dying in sin, hopeless. But God said, I lift up the Son of Man on the cross. And whoever looks at the Son of Man on the cross, by faith believing that the cross and the dying Son of God will heal him. The promise is this in verse 15. John chapter 3 verse 15 says that whoever believes in him, in whom? And the Son of God that died on the cross, should not perish but have eternal life. The man and the woman in the wilderness, in the camp of the children of Israel, beaten by snake, the poison slowly spreading, dying, lifted his head up in pain, looked at that bronze serpent in faith, because God told so. If you look at it, you will live. And he lived. The poison could do nothing. By faith, the power of God healed him. And you and I, in the wilderness of sin, beaten by sin, spreading in our body, killing us slowly, poisoning us. But Jesus said, if you believe, in the Son of Man lifted up on the cross, the poison of sin can do nothing. You will live and have eternal life. I tell you, brothers and sisters, we are modern Israel, traveling to the promised land, led by God. How many of us are complaining rather than giving thanks to God? How many of us are suffering in sin? God said, look up at the cross where the only Son of God was hung. And if you look up on the cross of God where the only Son of God have died for you, you will have eternal life. You don't have to die because of sin, but you will live eternal life because of the Son of Man who was lifted up on the cross. May that be our blessing. As we go through this wilderness of sin, let us learn to count our blessings and name them one by one. And when we suffer in sin and struggle in sin, look up to Jesus that was lifted up on the cross. And the promise is we will be blessed with eternal life. God bless you all. Never lose faith. Have hope in the promises of God. May you be blessed today, and may you always be blessed until Jesus comes. Amen.